father of Malcolm, also being celebrated tonight. We also have to acknowledge those who joined him in his great and mighty walk and stood by him, around him, over him, and provided love and strength for him. And so our Queen Mother, Betty, Dr. Betty, has to be acknowledged. And then there was a host of other family members, the brothers and the sisters that were a part of his great movement to restore our African dignity and our place in world history. So in our African tradition, you have various ways of acknowledging a great one and the people responsible for his greatness. And they have very complex libations and acknowledgements and celebrations. But because we want to hear the voices of people impacted, their lives were impacted by the work of Brother Malcolm, could we have the short version of the libation and the acknowledgement, and have a profound
He got muted.
Jumbo.
You got it? So brothers and sisters, as we celebrate this time among us, let's do it, each of us in our way, with a profound moment of silence, so we can link this great brother to those brothers and sisters and those forces and those sisters.
So say it again.
Again, brothers and sisters, with this profound moment of silence where each of us can reflect in our way on the legacy and the heritage that we've inherited from this brother and his beloved ones. Let's have that profound moment of silence. Okay, thank you, brothers and sisters. We can proceed with this timely and meaningful tribute to the respect and the struggle that the brother left us to continue. Madasi, Madasi, many, many thanks to all of you.
Thank you, sir.
You're welcome, brother.
Thank you.
Madasi P.
Thank you. Before I bring my sister Ilyasah on, May 19th is a loaded date on a lot of levels. On the engaging side, it's the date that several revolutionaries were also born. The great Ho Chi Minh, revolutionary leader of Vietnam, was born on May 19th. Malcolm's comrade and founding member of both the OAAU and the Malcolm X Commemoration Committee, Yuri Kuchiyama, was born on May 19th, 1920. And Luis Reyes Rivera, great Afro-Puerto Rican poet, and Jale, was also born on May 19th. May 19th is also a profound day to leave for the world, for the land of the ancestors. It's Ilyasah's uncle Wilfred, Malcolm's biggest brother, the oldest brother, left us on May 19th, 7 years ago. And of course, Alombe Brath, who we were just talking about, and his son is somewhere in this mix, left us on May 19th, just a few years ago, along with Sam Greenlee and Vincent Harding on the same day, the same year. So we will add their names as we, to that litany of folks that we had to talk about. I have to add the name also of Jose Marti, the leader of Cuban nationalism, who was killed in battle on May 19th, 1895. And then I want to acknowledge finally these founding ancestors of the Malcolm X Commemoration Committee, who are no longer with us, but who are also with Malcolm in the Organization of Afro-American Unity. Butch Gladstone, who was in Muslim Mosques Incorporated and the NOI with Malcolm. Gene Reynolds, who's also in the Nation of Islam and MMI with Malcolm. And of course, our founding chair emeritus, Herman Ferguson, long distance runner and pioneer of New African independence, of the New African Independence movement. All right, so with that then is our sister Ilyasah. I saw her on the screen. Is she ready to give her opening remarks?
Really want to give greetings.
There she is, Go ahead, my sister.
I would like to bring greetings. You know, about 3 weeks ago, maybe even about 3 weeks ago, I think it was, you know, it was when we were getting comfortable as we can get with this coronavirus isolation, right? And it gave me an opportunity to sit quiet and just listen and go inside of myself and be introspective and, you know, look at the years that I've been here and think about my father and think about my mother. And somehow I came across a video, and it was probably about 4 hours long. And I watched it in its entirety, and I was absolutely, wow, it just meant so much to me. And I know that I saw Bill Sales and I saw Zak Kondo, and I said, oh my gosh, I've got to get in touch with these two brothers, right? And then I discovered that this gentleman who did, who was pretty visible in the Who Killed Malcolm X documentary, I started discovering that he wasn't who I thought he was. And so since he wasn't who I thought he was, it made me look at a few other people, and I found many emails in my chains, and I reached out to this brother and I said, listen, can you put me in touch with Zak Kondo, with Bill Sales? You know, I know Dr. Jeffries, I've been in touch with him. Of course, I know Brother Herb Boyd, but I could not believe this really, it was just such a wonderful program with you two brothers and Conrad when he was still with the Nation of Islam, and that blew me away because I had never seen it. And I'm thinking, you know, who have I been friends with all these years? And the brother that I reached out to said, no, sister, he's okay. And so, you know, I just thought that what an opportunity to come together, especially on May 19th. And if I could just connect, you know, with some of these good brothers, Zayid Muhammad, Dr. Jeffries, Herb Boyd, William Sales, Zak Kondo, you know, Basir, Brother Charles, all of you. And if we could just come together, you know, especially during this time, and have a program together, what a gift, what a blessing that would be. And when I spoke to, I think Charles and Zayid, and he started telling me the people who were on this panel and the topic, Malcolm X speaks in the 21st century, beyond COVID, after the chickens came home to roost, I said, well, goddamn, you know, wow. So it is such an honor, really, it's such an honor to be in your presence. I appreciate you so much for keeping my father's legacy alive, because we know it's not for Malcolm to shine, but it's for the purpose of future generations to be able to benefit from his works and to understand who we are. And, you know, we don't want to have a lifetime of fighting injustice, right? We want to have the opportunity to live in our totality unapologetically, right? And so I'm so grateful to each one of you for your wisdom, for your compassion, and, you know, for your commitment. I'm so grateful. So I'm happy. I will sit here. If you guys are on, I think, for 3 hours, 2 hours, whatever it is, I'm happy to sit here in your presence and just listen. So thank you.
Thank you, sis. Listen, that just background for everybody's background. The video that she's talking about was an event that we hosted back in 1994, where we brought Zach. Zach, you remember that? It was you and Carl. And the nation tried to do a little strong arm show that tried to intimidate folks that did not work. And, you know, and these two fine young scholars, especially Zach, truly stood his ground and laid out what really happened and why we need to not play with that. Khalid Abdul Muhammad had just gotten put out of the nation under some very similar circumstances. He showed up. We gave him the mic afterwards. And of course, our little brother, Conrad, would later face some of the same music and kind of grow up too. So he's a very different person now than he was then. But it was a loaded show, but it's how serious the work of the Malcolm X Commemoration Committee has been for 27 years. And as far as I'm concerned, we ain't going nowhere. We got more to do, right? So I want to thank our elder, Dr. J, for his opening remarks and his very calm and sober way of bringing in the presence of the ancestors. And our sister Ilyasah. It's good to collaborate again. It's been a few years since we've been at the center together. We used to do the Malcolm X essay contest. We used to have the essay contest at the Shabazz Center. That's when we first really started working together. It's good to be working together again in the spirit of creating the United Front. Malcolm taught us about the United Front. We're not going to get out of this conversation without us talking about a United Front during these dangerous times. So I want to thank our lead folks, the Shabazz Center, the partnership, all of the co-hosts, the Sons of Africa. Charles, get ready because you're on deck. All right. And of course, our elders in the OAAU. I'm very proud. I want to acknowledge the work triumphant, the transcending of the COVID challenges in getting the pilgrimage and the gravesite ceremony done in spite of the limitations and done with dignity. Brother Ronell, Malcolm's baby nephew, came all the way down from Boston, and I'm glad he did, because this time merited his presence, right? Merited the family's presence on that side. So it was, so the work is, we carrying on, Sada's language, we carrying on. And so we're ready to go headlong into the whirlwind. Brother Charles, are you ready for your African ABCs on Malcolm?
Yes, sir. I'm ready for my...
Brother Charles is one of our precious sons from the Sons of Africa, and somebody who keeps me sane doing the work in the Malcolm X Commemoration Committee. Charles watches my back, and I appreciate him dearly. Charles, the floor is yours, sir.
All right. So first of all, on behalf of the Sons of Africa and the Organization of Afro-American Unity, I want to say thank you. Thank you to the guests for agreeing to come on. Thank you to the public for watching this important session. This is one of the few times when so many great scholars and people who loved Malcolm, who researched Malcolm, whose life and activities are based on Malcolm, are gathered together in one space. So I just wanted the public to know that and to appreciate that for what it is, and to thank you all for joining us. So tonight, normally when we have our pilgrimage, right, I usually do a thing on the stages of Malcolm's life on the way up to where he and beloved Mama Betty are buried. And I outlined 7 stages. Now, some people will put that to 4 or 5, but as an African, I have I think a different understanding, and I think that there's 7. So tonight, I'm going to do a much abbreviated presentation focusing on the life of Malcolm X, El Haj Malik El Shabazz, starting with a quick look at the stages of his life, and then focusing on 3 of those stages, the first 2 of which envelop his childhood and young adult life, and the formation of the ideas in his mind, which will later on be focused in his ideas and work as the man we know as Malcolm X. And the last stage is going to be discussing his role as an ancestor, in which his message, his ideas, and activities have served to inspire millions more people than his reach proved capable of in his lifetime. All right, so those stages. The stages of Malcolm's life as I see him are the stage I call Malcolm Little, when he was a child, that's 0 to 15 years old. Detroit Red, when he started getting engaged in the street life from 15 to 21 years old, when he hit a make or break point in his life where they called him Satan in prison. And the 4th stage is Malcolm X as we know him, the Nation of Islam minister, the leader, the organizer, and the world traveler. fifth stage, which I differentiate from Minister Malcolm X, is El Hajj Malik El Shabazz, when he became an Orthodox Muslim pilgrim and world traveler, founded the OAAU and the Muslim Mosque Incorporated. The sixth is when he became more African in his perspective, reaching out to African leaders, reaching out to Fidel and Kwame and Sekou and all of the others on the continent of Africa. And the seventh, as I said, is his ancestorship, where he became more powerful. So let's go now to that. We're going to concentrate on those first two stages and the last stage. So as a boy, Malcolm's life and ideas were influenced by his journeys with his father. And here's my little picture. I want to make sure that we pay respect to them. Let me try to pull my little pick up. I want to make sure that the people know what his parents look like. See, people try to raise Malcolm up like Malcolm wasn't a human being, but Malcolm came from a mother and a father. I hope y'all can see that. There's a little glare. It's not a good shot. But Malcolm came from Earl and Louise Little. And from Earl and Louise Little, he learned many great things. He was the only child, if his autobiography tells us, that journeyed with his father to build the UNIA. He was one of the children that appreciated the furthering work of his mother in writing for the UNI paper and doing administrative tasks to further his organizing work. And I think no doubt that these things inspired his creation in later years of the Nation of Islam's paper, Muhammad Speaks. They inspired his oratory. They inspired his organizing, his ideas and his various ideas on education, on African unity, and Pan-Africanism, on Black nationalism, on racism, on the viability of the nonviolent method, on his definition of community, or his definition of manhood, his definitions of self-defense versus nonviolence. No doubt they influenced, and we're talking about COVID today. Malcolm used to say, when you have poor schools, you get poor jobs. When you get poor jobs, you have a poor community, you get poor healthcare. So no doubt Malcolm would reiterate what he was saying in those days and these days, because the same conditions exist. Malcolm will also, and I'm going to change up the wording because people like to say police brutality. What Malcolm, I think, would say today is police criminality, because there's no doubt the police are acting as criminals in many instances. And we see that now more than ever with this COVID-19. In the white communities, they hand out masks. In the Black communities, they hand out beatdowns. And the police are trained in the law. So the police should know the law. The police are often given the benefit of the doubt simply because they are police and they're service of the people. But when it's found out that the police are doing wrong and they know the law, they are not judged to that same higher standard. And that's something that I think Malcolm would address in these days and times. I think Malcolm would exhort us to create a system, and we're going back to this childhood, to create a system around our children to prepare them for leadership in whatever fields they went into. Like Dr. Clark said, if you're going to be a street sweeper, be the best street sweeper you could be for African people. I think Malcolm would tell them more than that. He would say that we need, as Dr. Jeffries would say, to create systems around the nurturing and raising of our children, to prepare them to do the things and be the leaders in our community so that we could control the politics, the economics, and the culture in our communities. As I look around me today, I see a lot of great young Africans who I think Malcolm would be proud of. And I'm going to give a few examples to you if you don't mind. There's a young man that I know named Ilyasah, who was nurtured and raised in the Akan community that Nana Dinizulu, a contemporary and friend of Malcolm and his family and community, nurtured. There are young people like Ayana Obadeli and Nataki Kambon, raised by Kamal Kambon and his wife Mawia, who are doing great things in the community because they were nurtured in a system. They're doing things like building African business, and the son is even in Ghana teaching at the same time while he's using the online platform Abibitumi Casa to teach Twi in other languages and reach out to African scholars here. There are children like the Magloire children, Sesai, Sabor, Kabir, and Amoa, who were raised and nurtured in Washington, D.C. by their great parents who are also, their father is also a son of Africa, Kwao and Lafoma Magloire. And there's the Ancobia Society that they're part of there in DC. And these young adults in their 20s and 30s and 40s now are nurtured also in the East, in the Hua Shasa, and the various shoelays that were created after Malcolm, inspired by Malcolm, and other Council of Independent Black Independent Schools and other organizations, Asasiya, Ife Tayo here in New York. So many organizations inspired by Malcolm. And I know that Malcolm today would tell us that that is the path that we should be taking. Malcolm told us that we'd be fools to expect our enemies to give our children a proper education. And I think that we have still not learned that lesson. I think about him and I wonder how much more powerful he could have been. How much more powerful he could have been had he had such a community around him to support him. I think that Malcolm would have never even fallen and lost those precious years that he lost to the streets and the jails. But how many more Malcolms are we losing today? I think Malcolm would talk to us about that. There's so much more I could say, but there's a limited time. So I want to wrap up talking about the last stage of his life, his ancestorship. We as Africans understand that our ancestors are always with us. We must call on them. We must take the lessons from their life examples, study their works, study their words. Malcolm is just one of the finest examples we have of such ancestors that we could call on, but there are others. There's Dr. John Henry Clark, Dr. Yosef Ben Yakinen, Dr. Betty Shabazz, Dr. Francis Cress Wilson, Dr. Shashi McIntyre, Dr. Jack Felder, Dr. Asa Hilliard, Fannie Lou Hamer, Frederick Douglass, Kwame Ture, Kwame Nkrumah, Sekou Touré, Queen Mother Moore, LaRock Bay, Afeni Shakur, Fred Hampton. There's so many others. Marcus Garvey and Du Bois. Garvey's both of his wives, Amy. Queen Mother Fannie Clark. Malcolm Wood, I think, as a great student of history, is our struggle, tell us to remember these people and the thousands, millions more that are our ancestors. And more importantly, to study them and call on them in our prayers, in our prayer closet. But to look at Malcolm specifically, his greatness and clarity has proved itself truer through the test of time. So much so that now as an ancestor, people who disagreed with him in his life, like Wyatt T. Walker and James Farmer on that famous open mind dialogue they had so many years ago, about 50 plus years ago on the open mind. They told Malcolm they were wrong. Years later, they had an anniversary show with everybody that was still alive but Malcolm. And Wyatt T. Walker and all of the other people who disagreed with Malcolm's premise said that Malcolm was right in retrospect, knowing what they knew. But Malcolm was ahead of his time. He was ahead of his time. Malcolm in ancestorship has shown us not to fear physical death, but to stand up for truth. And that by doing so, we will live on in an honored place in our people's memories. And that we must do so by any means necessary. So in closing, I say to everybody viewing, to all the parents, to all the youth, to stand up boldly for our African humanity, to stand up for our African manhood and womanhood, to build your own reality, build your own communities, be like Malcolm. Malcolm X, and y'all can say this with me, Ibaye. El Haj Malik El Shabazz, Ibaye. Omar Wali, Ibaye. I am Malcolm X, Black Power.
All right, Brother Charles. You got a little windy there at the end, but you got it in.
It was good.
Wow. Long time, right? There's some training going on here. So some of the elders might not. This is some Sons of Africa training going on. We're glad this young man finally stepped up. We're going to go in this order. So as we get ready to move headlong into this program, we're going to do Bill Sales, Baba Zak, Viola, Basir Mchawi, Herb, Kelly, and Todd in that order, right? We got that. We got that. Let me work now. Right? Bill Sales. Well, one of the obscene things that happened with Manning Marabel's work is his total disrecognition of all of the good work, film and scholarship that was done on Malcolm before his book. Let me do that, Charles. Right? Bill Sales has given us the definitive political biography that Charles was just trying to put up on the screen. Right? You beat me to the punch. From civil rights to Black liberation, Malcolm X and the Organization of African American Unity. More important than that, Bill Sales, and we need to appreciate we're one of the places where we need to go coming out of this conversation is where are we going to be in 5 years for Malcolm's centennial, right? In 1990, in the first several years of the 1990s, Dr. Bill Sales, an activist scholar who was a part of students kicking the doors in at Columbia University back in the late 60s to create Black studies. An activist scholar helped put together Malcolm X Speaks in the 90s. That drew international attention, so much so the Cubans themselves had to do their own. They were so blown away by the level of scholarship and its organic relationship to our struggle in a contemporary and an ongoing sense. So this is the elder who you get ready to hear right now. I hope you're all ready to appreciate our beloved scholar, Baba Bill Sales. Bill, the floor is yours, sir.
Okay. Thanks, Zayid. I'm going to try to be brief, but I think I have a little PowerPoint to go along with my presentation. You can all see that, right? What I want to do is start with probably the most famous of Malcolm's quotations. We declare our right on this earth to be a man, to be a human being, to be respected as a human being, to be given the rights of a human being in this society, on this earth, in this day, which we intend to bring into existence by any means necessary. Let me start by saying that we find ourselves in the midst of a societal crisis brought on by the COVID-19 pandemic. Exacerbating this pandemic are economic conditions and their social consequences associated with a capitalism in which it is normal for periodic but worsening depressions to occur. These depressed economic conditions are exploited by the ruling elites and bankers and corporate executives to further consolidate their class rule and turn back threats to their hegemony. Racism is foundational to capitalism. There is no capitalism without racism. Thus, the negative impact of any depression falls disproportionately on Black folks, presenting us with genocidal conditions of life. The capitalists will not save us, neither will their political parties. What must we do? This is where Malcolm comes in. Malcolm admonished us to get educated, learn some history, and face facts. He put it this way: I've always been a man who tried to face facts and to accept the reality of life as new experience and new knowledge unfolds. I've always kept an open mind, a flexibility that must go hand in hand with every form of the intelligent search for truth. Now, in my study of Malcolm, certain facts become evident. First, fact number one, we are not ready. Malcolm X felt that if we are to struggle against the oppression put upon us, we as a people must change, especially by struggling against our own weaknesses. It's like the African revolutionary theorist Amilcar Cabral admonished us when he said, and I'll quote him very briefly, "Tell no lies and claim no easy victories," end quote. We are psychologically and culturally in bad shape. Malcolm taught us that we experience a spiritual death in denial, self-hatred, and lack of knowledge of true self. This was the Negro of which he spoke. Today, we might think that we have left that Negro far behind, that we are today resurrected as Black men and women. But this is not true. Malcolm X recognized that Black liberation had to begin with the psychological emancipation of Black people from an internalized sense of racial inferiority. This unbrainwashing of an entire people required a psychological reconciliation with Africa and an embrace of the entire history of people of African descent before and after the Holocaust of the slave trade and slavery. Malcolm often reminded his audiences, and I'll quote him again when he said, "Why you say you're no African, you left your mind in Africa. A second fact, we do not have to recreate the wheel. We have a Black radical tradition and we must study it. Malcolm X is a doorway to the Black radical tradition. The Black radical tradition had its roots in 19th century pan-Negro nationalism, 20th century Pan-Africanism and Garveyism, and the class struggle approach of the early Black Marxists in the African Blood Brotherhood. Malcolm came to understand more perfectly this Black radical tradition in the last 11 months of his life. At the time of his death, he was advancing a synthesis of the revolutionary Pan-African international tradition with the more conservative elements of Black economic and cultural religious nationalism that he had inherited from the Nation of Islam. This synthesis, which I call Pan-African internationalism, was further impacted by the need of Malcolm X to be responsive to constituencies with strong working class traditions in cities like Detroit, Cleveland, Philadelphia, and his base in Harlem. To present the demands of African American people in their national capacity required the construction of a Black United Front, and Malcolm X's Organization of Afro-American Unity was to be that front. This Black United Front had to make space for the poor and the déclassé elements to articulate their agenda and assume leadership positions in the struggle. A third fact, our salvation is in revolution, not reform. Malcolm X argued that the Black freedom struggle was a struggle beyond civil rights in pursuit of human rights. After reviewing the various anti-colonial uprisings, Malcolm X said, and I quote him, "I cite these various revolutions, brothers and sisters, to show you that you don't have a peaceful revolution. You don't have a turn the other cheek revolution. There is no such thing as a nonviolent revolution." Fact number 4, electoral politics alone will not save us. Electoral politics in the United States is a tool of oppression, not liberation. Malcolm warned us about subservience to the two major parties. His analogy was that of the wolf and the fox. Both of these animals are carnivores. The Republicans he saw as the wolves, clearly a mortal threat. But he warned of the dangers of the Democrats because they were sly and cunning like the fox, but ultimately no less dangerous than the wolf. Malcolm warned us that even with the vote, we continue to be powerless. He put it this way: when you take your case to Washington, D.C., you're taking it to the criminal who's responsible. It's like running from the wolf to the fox. They're all in cahoots together. Another fact for our consideration, number 5, every brother ain't a brother and every sister ain't a sister. Malcolm X let us know that the plantation was still with us, and as well, the house Negroes and the field Negroes. He was among the first to expose the emerging Black misleadership class. Fact number 6, socialism is the solution. Malcolm X warned us that capitalism is not the solution to our problems. It is our problem. It is the godfather of racism, sexism, and classism. Malcolm knew this. He was very clear when he said, and I quote him, "You can't have capitalism without racism. You can't operate a capitalistic system unless you are vulturistic. You show me a capitalist and I'll show you a bloodsucker." Malcolm X's political philosophy could most accurately be described as Pan-African internationalism. It increasingly tied the liberation of Black people here to the struggle against imperialism everywhere. He recognized that as Black people began to struggle everywhere, they looked to some form of socialist alternative to capitalism around which to build their futures. Fact number 7, we must struggle against the triple oppression faced by Black women: sexism, racism, and classism. Malcolm argued that our struggle must guarantee to our women full gender equality and liberation. He emphasized that all revolutionary movements which achieved success had a new vision of women and women's participation in the new society. In the last year of his life, Malcolm's new organization, the Organization of Afro-American Unity, sought that new role for African-American women. And my last fact. If we are to be free, we must pay the price of freedom. Malcolm put it this way: until the American black man lets whites know that we are really ready and willing to pay the price that is necessary for freedom, our people will always be walking around here second-class citizens, or what you call 20th century slaves. The price of freedom is death. We must be willing to pay this price. But just as important, we must be willing to exact a price from those who would oppress us. Self-respect demands self-defense if we're ever to achieve self-determination. I'm so proud to be a part of this program. It's so important, so late in the day, for us to be able to mobilize our forces and give respect and honor to Malcolm. But the best way we can do that is to receive the baton from him and run our leg, run our lap, and advance the struggle. And I'm certain that in the end, and without a doubt, we should be victorious.
Thank you, sir.
Yes.
Sir, yes.
Thank you.
Before I bring Zach on, I gotta make these remarks I want everybody to appreciate, because Bill ended with the whole question of are we willing to pay the price? One of the things that we do in our organization, we take the whole question of the support of our freedom fighters, of our political prisoners, young black men and women standing up on Malcolm's line who tried to pick up that baton, right? And tried to pick it up by any means necessary, and became the severe targets of what we now know as COINTELPRO, and some who are approaching now 50 years in prison. I want you to know that the Malcolm X commemoration today made a contribution of $500 to the legal defense of Sundiata Acoli. Sundiata was captured in Mount South State on Exit 9 back in 1973 with that fateful encounter on the New Jersey Turnpike that left a solid woman wounded and left Zayid Shakur and a state trooper dead. Sundiata's been in prison for 48 going on 49 years. Cleared for parole almost 20 years ago, and yet the state still tries to keep him in their clutches. Our work around Sundiata is a part of a larger effort to have governors in all of these key states with these large prisons where this COVID-19 is spreading like wildfire, to release aging prisoners to take pressure off of the system. And of course, our political prisoners are very much in the mix, and many of them are facing some serious illnesses. Maroon Schultz, right, the bold combatant out of the Philadelphia chapter of the Black Panther Party, battling stage 4 colon cancer. Imam Jamil El-Amin, the former H-Rat Brown, battling multiple myeloma and recovering from a stroke just last year, right? Mumia Abu Jamal recovering from the ravages of hepatitis C, so you know his immune system is limited. Veronza Bowers, a cancer survivor. We got a long list of what's happening with our political prisoners, and talking about being in prison over 40, almost 50 years. The time has come to bring our freedom fighters home. So for those who have paid the price, we have to claim them, honor them, recognize them, turn the volume up, and get them up out of the clutches of the state, right? So with that, now I'm going to turn now to Baba Zak Kondo. Not only did Zak give us the definitive contribution on the assassination of Malcolm X, but he did it in an African way. He did it on the shoulders of African values and African principles. And when you read that book, you absolutely need to read the last chapter that shows us how using the culture in an upright way, in keeping with Malcolm's upright character, we need to be able to prevent these kind of things from happening in our circles ever again, right? So with that, Baba Zak, are you ready?
Yeah, can y'all hear me?
Yes, sir, there he is. There we go.
Okay, first off, it is an honor to be here. I'm trying to balance a couple things. Peter Bailey is having a program right now that I'm also kind of chiming in. So if you see me kind of looking to my right, that's me trying to, pay respect, to my esteemed elders. So I apologize for that. And hopefully they can't hear me. And I'm not into the technology. My son is upstairs, so he has to come down to, help set up all this stuff. So hopefully, I don't think I'm disturbing them, and I can now have dialogue with y'all. So yeah, let me just say that it is an honor to be here, to talk with, and to be in the company of, such esteemed African warriors. So thank you for inviting me. When I talk about Malcolm X, and when I think about Malcolm X in more modern times, I think one of the things, and it was kind of touched up on a little bit, I think by brother Charles, and I think brother Bill touched up on it a little bit as well. So I kind of want to take it a little bit more. And that is, when you talk about Malcolm X, you're talking about an immortal ancestor. And in traditional African society, an immortal ancestor means somebody who has so left their mark, has so touched the living, so left a legacy that that person is constantly talked about, that person is constantly referred to, that person is constantly on people's minds, and it doesn't matter how long the person has been in the ancestry. Not a lot of people in our history have achieved the level of an immortal ancestor. And I think Malcolm has achieved the level of an immortal ancestor. Now, there's certain things that I would like to talk about, very, very briefly in reference to what I think Malcolm's, legacy is and why Malcolm is such an important person in our history. The first thing is something that we talk about it. Malcolm talked about it, I guess, more indirectly than directly. And I guess historically we call it consciousness. But I think with Malcolm, what we're really talking about, and I think one of the things that distinguishes him is mind liberation. When we look at Malcolm X, we look at someone who in the middle of the 1960s had developed a consciousness to the degree that, with all the distractions, with all the miseducation, with all of the forces out there, social, political, economic, cultural, mental, that were basically designed to oppress us, Malcolm was able to develop a consciousness that was so rare during his time. Now, later we're going to see it, we're going to see it in some ways even expanded, but in so many ways, Malcolm was the first. Malcolm kind of like set the mode. He took Garvey and Garveyism, and I think he took it basically to the next level. And Malcolm understood that we can talk about struggle all we want, but if this right here is still enchained, if this right here is still basically oppressed, then then struggle for all practical purposes is irrelevant. And so I think that one of the reasons why we have to appreciate the ancestor Malcolm X is because he showed us how we could liberate our minds, how we could be above the fray, if you will. And although I don't necessarily like to make a whole lot of comparisons, but if you look at the civil rights leaders of his era, you don't see, none of them, and let me just be frank, none of them achieved a consciousness even close to Malcolm. And I think that, we have to appreciate that. And remember when he did it, I'm reminded when I first went to Harlem, when I was in college, I went to this African bookstore, cultural center, and I bought a poster of Malcolm. And it had him in, I guess it was August 64 when he was in Ghana. And it just basically just had him, looking like that. And, he had on a dashiki. But what the poster said, and what I used in my book, he said, and I'm gonna quote, he said, he was a hero and a hope. He was not a myth, only a man. But to be a hope and a man in mid-20th century America was to be something special, unquote. And I think in so many ways, that's what distinguishes a Malcolm X from a Martin Luther King, from a, somebody mentioned James Farmer, or, some of the other, Roy Ennis, some of the other so-called civil rights leaders, because their consciousness never could get close to a Malcolm X. Some of the other things that I think distinguish Malcolm and why we still appreciate his relevancy today is that Malcolm appreciated and affirmed the beauty of being an African person with no apologies, and other than maybe someone like a Paul Robeson and, some of the other, some of the longtime Garveyites, out of Harlem and stuff, this whole concept of reconnecting to Africa, talking about Africa, when a lot of the civil rights leaders, when they went to, when they went abroad, they didn't go to Africa, they went to Europe. They didn't understand the importance of that connection between our Africanisms. And I think Malcolm, during that era, understood that. And I think that's another reason why we appreciate him. He also understood the importance of of connecting those global elements. Malcolm understood that our struggle was never confined to the United States. And I know some of the other brothers mentioned this earlier. Our struggle was always about African people against our European oppressor and their systems of patriarchy and capitalism and all that. Malcolm understood that when other leaders were just simply talking about the United States, the civil rights movement, getting a couple rights, without any real understanding that we are intertwined spiritually and otherwise with Africans outside of here. And then I also wanted to say a few other things about Malcolm real quickly. Malcolm spoke boldly, but he spoke the truth. And historically, that has been rare because we got people who are constantly, want to make sure that they will not offend certain elements, like King and them, for example. They had to always be conscious to not offend white liberals because white liberals is where they got so much of their money. So they're constantly walking this tightrope. Malcolm never walked no damn tightrope. Malcolm basically would look you in the face, look you in the eye, and he would say what every African person was thinking. What we would normally say behind closed doors, Malcolm would say publicly. And that was so rare during his time on this planet, and you have to appreciate that. And then the other thing too is Malcolm also understood that struggle was broader. That struggle historically was always universal when it came to African people. And that's why when he created, for example, the OAAU, the goal of the OAAU was always at some stage to connect, to make it some type of a linkage with the OAU. And, that was Malcolm's vision. Malcolm understood the importance of making those African connections on a global level. And again, during that time period, it was very rare to see somebody being able to basically do that. And then I guess the last thing that I would want to say about Malcolm is Malcolm was a link. He linked so many important elements within the African universe. He linked, for example, Black nationalism and Pan-Africanism. He even linked the civil rights movement in so many ways. He brought the radical element, if you will, into the civil rights movement. He linked Africans in the Caribbean, Africans in the continent, Africans in Europe, Africans even in Canada. He was constantly serving as a link. He also, we got to talk about Islam. He also basically linked Islam, Africans here with Muslims in other parts of the globe. It was like that was kind of like Malcolm's constant mission in so many ways, even though he may not have necessarily articulated it so much. But that was part of what he did that makes him immortal, is that, you can go from the left or to the right, and somewhere in there, Malcolm has some connection. Malcolm has, either he inspired or he challenged, or in some cases he offended. But all of that was part of the Malcolm beauty. All of that was part of what makes Malcolm an immortal ancestor. And I'll leave it there.
Beautiful, Bible. Beautiful, Bible. Beautiful. Beautiful. God, Lord, I wish we were live with a lot of folks, because I want those rounds of applause for you. Is Sister Vi up? Is she ready? Vi, can you hear us?
Can you hear me?
There we go. There we go.
Yes.
We just had 2 generations of some top grounded Black radical scholarship. Let's bring it back to the street, right? Today every May 19th, we shut down 125th Street for the last 20 something years, right? And today was no different. It was a little different in character because of COVID-19 having done some things and so far as commercial traffic is concerned. But we are not going to let this day go down without raising the volume on just what this day is. So I just leaving the streets, literally, right? I want to bring our elder, one of our founding warrior women for the December 12th movement, right? Viola Plummer. Viola, the mic is yours. Vi?
Peace. I am so energized by listening to Brother Zak and Bill said, I mean, I am sitting here ready to go to war. You see, because I always learn what it is that I must use to do my work and gather who I can around me to help me do that work that I can't express to you. I'm sitting here saying, if I could take this, if I could take Bill and Dr. J and Zak and Charles with me every day, that would be part of what I do. That the brothers and sisters that I work with knew of Malcolm because we lived in the period where Malcolm was alive. We heard Malcolm's teaching. But to hear it codified right in the divisions of his life and in the summation of his life, listen, I am so energized. You see, we understood clearly that we were an African people. My father was a Guardiite, okay? So that we knew that we were Africans. We knew, I would tell the story, my mother hated white people and their hate. And they said you shouldn't use the word hate, and maybe not. But she hated white people to such a degree. She used to tell us, if they seek any information from you, tell them the opposite. She said, if they hold a mirror to your face and ask, is that you? Say no. Because see, she understood that they were the enemy. And I guess that does not sit well in certain circles where you say crackers are the enemy. That's like, I guess, too crass, but it reflects the crassness and brutality and destruction of African people. Those words that I use could never do that. But we understood, what could we do? What did Malcolm say? He said, don't go to the oppressor, right? We understood that to mean to go outside, so that our whole effort in the early 80s, and 90s was to focus in on just a little piece of that called reparations. And so we organized maybe about 300 to 400 people to go to the United Nations and declare that the transatlantic slave trade was a crime against humanity, that it was then, is now, and must always be that crime, and that they must pay for it. We also knew that there were so many different things going on, that there were so many different ways in which to solve the problem, right, that crackers had created for us. And so our small piece of that was definitely in the street. Definitely in the street. That every time the police killed or attempted to, in some small way, that was addressed. At least when the brother said that Malcolm's influence was to release your mind. See, that's what we try to do, because that is the key. That is the key. If young people and old people like me and middle-aged people could hear you all every day, that is Malcolm's work. That is what you're supposed to do because you're Africans. See, so that we, May 19th, May 20th, May 25th, et cetera, is always we've got to get our people in the street. We've got to get a way to talk to our people, and it's in the street. It's in their storefront shops. It's in the hair salons. But we've got to find a way to get to our people so that they could hear you all, so that they could learn, right? And not that they don't already know. You know, Zach, I read your book, 2, 3, made sure all my kids and people read it, right? So, and Dr. J, I mean, so we've got to find a way. Those of us who now say we need to pass the baton, well, we need to have a group of people that we could pass it to. So that if I could close with this, that Zayid, I don't know how you could do it, but I think it's absolutely necessary that this is, and you know I'm Neanderthal. Soon as all this technology and all the rest of that stuff is like, that's for y'all to do. Point I want to make is that we see coming at capitalism in various different ways, right? Right now, we see the Achilles heel of capitalism is the destruction of the health of our people. Absolute destruction of health. And how they do it is by insurance companies. That you have to pay for mediocre health insurance or none at all. That massive amounts of money are taken from us to buy, quote, health insurance. Health insurance. However, the insurance companies decide who provides it. You could not go to Dr. Kakai, that's my doctor, because he would not, the insurance company would not pay him because he's a holistic doctor. So we are saying that we need single payer health insurance. We need single payer health insurance. We see that coming at the Achilles heel of capitalism. The health industry has surpassed technology and all of the other industries. And that money comes directly from us. So all I'm saying in conclusion is that how brilliant you brothers are and the people that you all could reach. And single phrase, single payer health insurance. Because if we're healthy, we can release our minds. And if we could release our minds, we can make revolution without question. Thank you.
Viola, yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. And I put Vi in front of Basir for a reason. Basir just did a strong article related to what we're talking about in terms of the overhead of this particular moment. And Ilyasah, I want her to, if she's still here, to really appreciate where we were going with the title. COVID-19 is a cover of capitalism that's a wake-up call for us, right? Wake-up call. Malcolm has made it clear that our mission is to charge this United States government with genocide by the way it's treating us. And those genocidal conditions have us at the margins, and we're going out of here in numbers 2 times to 6 times our percentage in the population as a consequence of that genocide. And if we do not wake up to that and organize with that paradigm that he lists in mind, we really need to understand that. So when we say the chicken's coming home to roost here, we're saying that with some military maturity. What do we mean? Yeah, they started this mess in China and Iran to try and get at them biochemically and whatnot, and it blows back on the United States, which is apparently what it appears to have done. The casualties, the collateral damage is our people. So here, chickens coming home to roost is not making us glad. It's making us sad, making us angry. It needs to make us ready to start turning it up on the whole question of our human rights and pushing the human rights paradigm forward. Also, and as I bring Basir on, this is year 2020. We have 4 years left in the decade of the Afro-descendant. And forces who are serious about that have been raising the question of reparations. And everybody in this room and on this table and all the forces that we represent have been doing that. But in the spirit of the united front that Malcolm is talking about, that we got to start closing ranks and bring that closer together and turn the volume up. So with that, that's where this title came from, right? I want everybody to get that. I really wanted Ilyasah to appreciate that, right? And Basir I'm going to put that article that he did in the Amsterdam News back on our Malcolm X Commemoration Committee Facebook page right after we finish that. Basir, are you ready, sir?
I'm ready, brother. I'm ready.
The mic is yours.
Yes, sir. Habar Ghani, Alafia, Hotep, Assalamu alaikum. One of the challenges that many of us face is the idea of how do we make Brother Malcolm real to the new generations. When we look at reality, Brother Malcolm, as we know, was assassinated 55 years ago. And it was about 66 years ago that Brother Malcolm undertook the challenge of transforming the Nation of Islam from a cult to a formidable organization. Right? We have to go back to 1953 when Brother Malcolm gets out of prison, goes to Detroit, and he asked the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, well, where are all the believers? And the Honorable Elijah Muhammad at that particular point takes him to where all the believers are, and the believers are in the numbers of, I guess we have to say almost less than 100. So for the next decade, from 1953 until 1963, Brother Malcolm goes ahead and transforms this cult into this formidable organization. And the question for the young people is, of course, well, how did this happen? Because in order to understand that, you almost had to be alive at the time to experience some of the things that some of us who are now senior citizens actually experienced. What do I mean? What am I talking about? 1959, The Hate That Hate Produced. Mike Wallace goes ahead and shows, his intent was to show the Nation of Islam to white people. But what he ended up doing is showing the Nation of Islam to Black people. And Black people at that particular point began to understand that there was this organization that was being formed that was saying things that people were not used to hearing. And it was Brother Malcolm who had gone ahead and had actually he was able to engineer this particular kind of transformation. It's unbelievable. After this, we go to 1963. When the Word is Given, Brother Lewis Lomax, an important book that those of us who were alive and could read in 1963, when we got the book, it was like, wow, what is this? This new organization, new to us, this new understanding, this new way of thinking. Now, how do we translate this to the new generations who were not around to experience this? Myself, I'm kind of like getting old, senior citizen. Brother Malcolm was assassinated, I was 15 years old. I was at that particular point living in the Bronx and was ready, would go and travel to Harlem. And at that particular point in February 65, I was ready. I said, well, when it gets a little warmer, I'm ready to go to Harlem, to go ahead and sit down with Brother Malcolm and the brethren and see what in the world is going on. All right. I didn't have that opportunity to do that because, as we know, Brother Malcolm was cut down February 21st, 1965. But myself and some of us who are here today were around and understand what Malcolm actually really meant at that time. So our challenge is, how do we present context to Brother Malcolm? And what do? I have some kinds of suggestions. Number one, we have to talk and record the elders. There's still a few folks who are around at the time with Brother Malcolm, whether we talk about Peter Bailey, whether we talk about Dr. Jeffries. There are some others, not many at this particular point, but the idea is, number one, we need to talk to the elders. We need to record them. And I say this because one of the things that I talk about now all the time is the idea of creating and institutionalizing an African archive. That so many of us have had experiences that are so critically important. And the question is, in regards to all of the information, all of the memorabilia, all of the documents that we have, what is to happen to those particular documents? And how do we actually transmit that to the next generation? One of the things I'm working on now is an organization, we call it UPAMA, the Ujima Pan-African Media Archives, an organization specifically designed to go ahead, build, create, institutionalize our archive. The Schomburg can't do it. It's part of the New York Public Library. They can't do it. It's impossible. So this is one of the things that we have to do in regards to creating this link to the coming generations.
Is it on mute?
We have to continue to work in the spirit of Brother Malcolm. We have to create this operational unity, especially now. And the final thing that I just want to say is that we have to create a people's tribunal to analyze the impact of COVID-19 on our community and to begin to organize our next steps. We find ourselves in a particular situation where we are depending, or many of us are depending in our community, on our enemy to try to save us in regards to the issue of health. And we know that that's not going to happen. For years, many of us have been talking about eating right, taking various kinds of supplements, and hopefully it's been some of what it is that we've been doing that has saved us from this particular disease.
Yeah.
You know, we're looking to traditional Western medicine to essentially say that what we have been doing is okay. And obviously that is not going to happen. You know, we see now that they're talking about all of a sudden, well, you should take zinc. They're talking about doing vitamin C drips in regards to bringing back people from this pernicious disease. All right, so now many of the things that we've been doing for years are being, to an extent, legitimized by this traditional Western medicine, but we don't need that, right? This tribunal, the idea that we need to come together to look at what impact that this pandemic has had on our community, I think is critically, critically important. And to do something like that is clearly something that we have to do in the spirit of Brother Malcolm. I want to leave you with the names of some of our ancestors, those who worked with Brother Malcolm, influenced by him. People like, was mentioned, Baba Herman Ferguson, Queen Mother Moore, who we haven't mentioned, who we need to mention, because the first person I ever heard talking about reparations was Queen Mother Moore. Brother Abdullah Abdul Razak, who over the last 20 years has given me even a deeper understanding of Brother Malcolm, and myself, along with one of his sons, is working on a book of some of the presentations, the conversations that I've had with Brother Abdullah. And of course, one of my mentors, I have to mention Baba Jitu Weusi, who influenced me in so many different kinds of ways and was influenced by Brother Malcolm. So as I said, and I began with, our challenge is, how do we, as now elders, go ahead and translate what Brother Malcolm actually was for the generations that are to come? It's a serious challenge that the young people are ready. So we just have to determine what is the best methodology in regards to going ahead and really facing that challenge. Peace and blessings. It's good, an honor to be here. And we got to keep this going.
Yes, sir. And by the way, you can hear Baba Basir every Thursday, Education at the Crossroads on WBAI. And they always bring it strong. Malcolm's birthday, anniversary, Malcolm's assassination, always bring it very strong. So look forward to Thursday and Baba Basir presenting there. Is the great Herb Board ready? Is Herb ready? While he's trying to get himself together, got to talk about Herb in several ways. One, Herb, just as a writer and journalist, in the last 10 years has been prolific. And we have to give Herb his props on generating so much work just within the last 10 years, including Malcolm's diary that he did with Ilyasah, right? His legendary diary documenting himself on those important trips abroad, trying to broaden our struggle and trying to build those links of our struggle in a Pan-African way along the human rights paradigm. Book out on the Lombe, right? From Sugar Ray Robinson to Malcolm X. I mean, that's the gamut, right? Book out on our Detroit, right? Malcolm's from Detroit. Herb's from Detroit. My mama's from Detroit, right? The great city that is Detroit, and all of this, its rich history and how that history needs to be reclaimed for our presence in that city to continue to make a difference. Baba Herb, are you ready, sir?
Okay, I'm here. You catch me up?
Yeah, there you go. And finally, last but not least, there has not been one but two book responses to the horrible attack on Malcolm's legacy, right? That was the work of the late Manning Marable, right? We were in with Todd Bridges and Todd Burroughs and his contribution of the live reinvention the other volume was By Any Means Necessary, Malcolm X Real Not Reinvented. And Herb was, had his hand very much in that. Herb, for all the work you have done just in the last few years, I want to salute you, sir, as you know, writer to writer. You getting your stuff out, and we really appreciate that. And you've given us tools and weapons that we can absolutely use. So I wanted to shout you out. Y'all get ready for her book. Sir, the floor is yours.
Hey, Baba,
Right?
Zayid,
Yes.
man, my kufi, I doff my kufi to thee. You've done a remarkable job of assembling an ensemble of scholars here, people who have reflected on the majesty of El Hajj Malik El Shabazz. Over my shoulder, I was at the Tizian Cafe. I don't know if you saw some of this stuff over my shoulder. We had a portrait of Malcolm. The Tizian Cafe is on St. Nicholas, right around the corner here. Currently, I'm looking at the house, the apartment, the second place that Malcolm lived here in Harlem when he was 18 years of age. He stayed here with his brother Reginald in the basement apartment. And the other place was around the corner at 800 St. Nicholas. This neighborhood, as many of you know, is just like festooned with Malcolm's memory, his places where he worked. Earlier, I was at the Tizian Cafe. That was old Jimmy's Chicken Shack. And Malcolm was a waiter there. And Red Fox was washing dishes. And even before that, Zayid, you have the estimable Red Fox, the great comedian, also washed dishes there while Malcolm, you know, was taking care of people on the floor. Charlie Parker he washed dishes there, listening to Art Tatum, the great maestro behind the piano. Around the corner, now I live right, you could look right through the building here, you can see where I live, just one block away on 146th Street. Up the street here on 147th, of course, is the Child's Faith Temple where Malcolm's funeral was held, and that magnificent eulogy delivered by Ossie Davis right up the street there. The church is no longer there. They moved it around the corner, one block around the corner. But those memories, they hang there forever for a lot of the people who live in this neighborhood, some of whom remember and actually attended the funeral. I've talked to a few of them. Ilyasah, if you go down to St. Nicholas and make a right, you go over to Le Marcherie. And of course, if those of you who paid close attention to Malcolm's autobiography know that he had an encounter there with West Indian Archie. And if you go a little bit further, I mean, this neighborhood, Red Fox, he stayed upstairs on top of a building after he got off from work at Jimmy's Chicken Shack. And then Ralph Ellison, where he wrote Invisible Man, is just 2 or 3 doors away. So what I wanted to do is say that this neighborhood is just loaded with memories of Malcolm. And I hope that my 35 students that I have at City College, you know, are paying some attention, because here's some valuable lessons for you, more than I can do in the classroom for you. You know, to have these here, they're very passionate voices, particularly Ilyasah, Dr. Jeffries, Basir, Baba, Zak Kondo. You know, I guess you're gonna have Todd Burroughs coming, of course, Viola. You know, these are important voices, you know, for my students. All of them much, much too young to remember any of these things about Malcolm's life. But I think you conveyed to them some understanding. And there's 2 words that stand out in when Malcolm went to Oxford to do his debate over there. One of the participants was asked, you know, what do you think of him? You know, his presentation here. And my man said 2 words. He was authentic revolutionary. 2 words, authentic revolutionary. I mean, a man whose integrity was absolutely unimpeachable. You know, I met him. You talk about COVID-19. 19 resonates for me because that's how old I was when I met Malcolm. So you're talking about 61 years ago. It's amazing that I still have some very, very sharp memories of the first time I met him in Detroit, going to Temple Number 1 on Linwood Avenue there. We've talked about that, you know, many, many times, Baba, and we need to do it again. So my battery is running off. You know, I don't think I have much battery left here. I got a few more years left though. And I hope that I have an opportunity to share with you and this fantastic crew of yours some other memories. Currently, I sent you a piece earlier, Baba, working on Malcolm X and the CIA. And I've dug in there pretty deep. I mean, it's got some like 10,000 pages from the Freedom of Information Act. And much of it is redundant. So much of it is redacted. But there's still some germs and there's still some gems, you know, that I'm going to pluck out. I'm about 25 pages deep into writing this thing up, and who knows what's going to happen with it, possibly a long essay. But that's an important phase, you know, much as I'm in this neighborhood talking about Malcolm's teen years. Of course, Ilyasah has done a remarkable job in covering his early years. But I think his teen years need to be covered a little bit more than just a kind of so-called, you know, what he was doing, the criminal activity, the selling of drugs and what have you. But he also was cultivating an intelligence. He was laying the groundwork, you know, for that particular perspective, the kind of vision that he would have in that last year and a half of his life, which I feel is just epitomizes his perspective in terms of his political, his cultural, his economic understanding of where we had to go with, as a people, and what he said to the people in Egypt when he attended the summit in Cairo. Didn't get a chance to speak there, but he delivered a very important paper to some of the participants. And they began to understand that this was a legitimate ambassador from Black America. You know, you talk about Obama, you talk about Dr. King. Well, I think you could elevate. You can put Malcolm right up there with him, if not above. Thank you very much. My battery is up.
Okay, while Zayid is getting himself.
I'm steady running my mouth and was just as muted as I wanted to be.
Zayid, before we move on, Baba Herb just laid out that magnificent history of Malcolm's relation to Harlem. One of the Harlemites via roots in South Carolina, we need to acknowledge that I said OAAU, as we all know that know him, Brother Baba James Small is the OAAU for us. But we want to acknowledge him specifically at this moment, just because.
You heard from him? Is he going to chime in?
I did not hear from him, but we want to acknowledge that this came about as part of conversations with him. So we want to give thanks to him, acknowledge his presence. Today is actually his anniversary. He loved Malcolm so much that
he got married on his birthday.
His wife got married.
Right. And had a woman agree with that.
And right.
Gotta love that.
Gotta agree with that. That's a real thing.
Gotta love that.
We want to make sure that we acknowledge his presence spiritually, even though he may not be on the panel as he wanted to be.
It was very important, as always, in making what happened today at the ceremony happen. Absolutely. We stand strongly and squarely on Baba James' shoulders. Thank you for that, Charles. Right. Let me just change this up real quick. If you had a choice of colors, which one would you choose, my brother? If there was no day or night, which one would you choose to be right? We are forced to see him in black and white, absent of color behind the cold hand of history that stopped with his blood exploding on our eyes on February 21, 65. Grainy as if removed from us for centuries, although really it's only been a twinkling of an eye. We are forced to see him in black and white, but we have always felt him red. We have always felt him blue. We have always felt him sun soaring, yellow and orange, and all the color of fire and rainbows as he continues to speak to us, continues to rage for us, continues to push us past our fears rooted in genocide's white lies, continues to love us, Father, fist full and whole, no matter who the reigning architects and managers of the empire are. And we continue to hear him, feel him, even in these gory times, bursting with shot and shattered Palestinian women and children, drenching their flags with their bodies barking with blood, hot times, burning with wildfires, choking a whole continent in the South Pacific, blind that once used this conquering sight to hunt its indigenous into a sinister extinction. Cruel times, butchering with auction block savagery, families into broken pieces at that hate-hatched wall on our Mexican border, bone-littering times as cops shot Black lives splatter all over our streets, lives that have never, ever mattered. Yes, in these gory, dizzying times of alternate facts, but no alternate reality, we push past tail-tucked, compromised so-called leaders to be touched by his love and range, to be taken with his sharpshooting truth, to feel him red, to feel him blue, nightmare blue, to feel him sun soaring yellow, orange, and all the searing hues of rainbows and fire in a whirlwind of color that continues to rage like volcanoes that they cannot make go away. If you had a choice of colors, which one would you choose, my brother? If there were no day or night, which would you prefer to be right? In black and white, in black and white, in black and white. For Malcolm, all right? Brother Kelly, you ready, young man?
Yes, yes, I am.
And Herb set you up with Malcolm on the Streets, talk about those years, and that's something that you talk about, right? So I thought it was a good segue to bring you on. Kelly Harris, by the way, is at Seton Hall University now as a consequence of young Black and brown students making some noise on that campus for the restoration of a rich tradition in Black scholar, led by Bill Sales for a long time. The same Bill Sales that you just heard was at the helm of the Africana Studies program, a world-class program once upon a time in the up south state of New Jersey, South Orange, New Jersey. And Kelly has a chapter in Herb's Malcolm X Real, Not Reinvented. So Kelly, the floor is yours, son.
All right, thank you very much. You know, when I saw all the list of names in front of me, I didn't think it would be much meat left on these bones for me to nibble at. But thank you for having me on here. And I also have to give a shout out to Brother Herb and Baba Hakeem Al-Budi for allowing me to be in the book, to say a few words in the book. It's funny, I'm here at Seton Hall now, where Bill Sells did such great work for many years. You know, Brother Zach, my first job was at Bowie State, where you had been for years doing some great work. You know, I had read the Black Student's Guide to Positive Education a long time ago before I even went to college. So I appreciate you and your work, and I appreciate all the stuff that people have been doing here. But I want to pick up actually where Herb, that's right, yeah, thank you. I want to pick up where Brother Herb went with it, because there's a couple things I think that there's room for us to excavate even more about Malcolm X. And first, when we deal with his years before he went to prison, before he was incarcerated, I'm always reminded by Dr. Clark, who had said a long time ago that Malcolm was educated and Malcolm knew things before he went to prison. And I think Malcolm helped kind of create this image that he didn't know anything in the autobiography of Alex Haley. If you all remember, Alex Haley said he would always have to push Malcolm to talk about himself in the early parts. And it's interesting because when we go back, we look at somebody like Vicky Garden, who 7 years ago, Kamosi Woodward and Eric McDuffie had wrote an article, when you're in a country that's progressive, the women is progressive. And they started off with Vicky Garvin. And they talked about Vicky Garvin, how she was recruiting Malcolm to be in the Communist Party in the 1940s. You know, this hustling Malcolm, she said he was very astute, very learned, very educated. She said she was very impressed with Malcolm. And I think that that we need to really go back and excavate that what was Malcolm exposed to, what was Malcolm doing. And I think we all understand too, you know, there's this tendency when we think of people who are hustling and things of that doesn't mean they don't know anything. People out here hustling today know a lot and read a lot and are in tune with a lot of things that's going on. So we really have to go back to that and understand that. The next piece, when Brother Boyd was talking about the CIA, I'm so glad that he's doing that work. You know, matter of fact, Brother Basir, you mentioned a People's Tribunal on COVID-19. We need a People's Tribunal on the CIA and the FBI. And I think that's long overdue for what they did. But when we look at Malcolm, when he's coming out of prison, and before he even gets out, on September 23rd, 1952, the FBI had already received letters that Malcolm had sent. Where'd they get the letters from? How'd they get those letters? They had already got those letters. In 1954, he was already on the Communist Sabotage Index, the Communist Index, in 1954, right? So when we start unpacking this whole thing, the CIA is founded in 1947. And when we look at what the CIA was doing and what they were focused on, Africa is a very important piece. Before the CIA is even formed, the United States is in negotiations with Britain and talking about how to get a hold of the uranium in the Congo. In the 1940s, they're talking about this in order to build more atomic weapons, all right? So when we get into as the 1950s are developing these African liberation movements, the CIA is already in Ghana. Even before Ghana gains its independence, they're already spying on Bill Sutherland, he was one of the first expatriates to go there in Ghana. They had already been spying on him, right? They had already, by the time Nkrumah comes to power, the CIA is already trying to recruit his finance minister, K.A. Badima. They also recruiting Tom Mboya. And Tom Mboya, as an aside in the part of history, a big labor activist, the CIA was recruiting him. And Tom Mboya was one of the key people at the All African Conference in 1958 with Nkrumah, and he was very close to Nkrumah. So I think so by the time Malcolm gets to Ghana, Malcolm is walking into an environment where the CIA had already been for over a decade, and I'm not sure that he understood that, and I'm not sure that the expatriates understood that environment he was walking in and what they were prepared to do. So we have to talk about that and excavate that some more. When we look at, as we unpack the assassination of Patrice Lumumba, that even gives us insight to the role, what the CIA would do to someone like Malcolm X and other leaders. You know, President Eisenhower was on record in a National Security Council meeting saying that we have to dispose of Patrice Lumumba. And the people around the table were shocked that he would even go on record and use that kind of language. Alan Dulles, the CIA chief, said that we had to get rid of Lumumba. His undersecretary, C. Douglas Dillon, said that if we allow Lumumba, even though Lumumba was arrested by the United Nations, if we allow him to speak to the people, his rhetoric is so strong, he's such a great orator, that he will turn the Congo military around to his side. So they said, we cannot let him speak to the people anymore. See, Douglas Dillon said that. Now, why is that important? Because we know how great, how powerful Malcolm's oratory was. So when he's going to Africa on his tour, when he's doing that, what do you think that the CIA is thinking about Malcolm and his impact, his influence? You know, a lot of times people try to discount Malcolm and say, well, what bills did he get passed? What legislation did he get passed? And all those kind of things. But we have to look at the strength of his oratorical skills, his organizing skills, and what impact, what kind of threat that meant for the United States government. And I think that hasn't been excavated. So what I'm suggesting, and jumping on what Brother Herb Boyd was laying out, is when we really dig deeper into the CIA, it's not just the CIA files that we have to dig deeper into. We have to go back and look at the Eisenhower papers. We have to go look at the Truman papers and the Kennedy papers. We really have to do that. I don't think we've done a deep dive into that. Because really, when people are talking about the CIA, there's an admittance about the Lumumba piece, but they're very silent on Ghana. They're silent on Malcolm, and we know they were spying on him. So that's something that I think that we really need to look for. So it's two things: excavating the CIA legacy as regards Malcolm X, and going back and excavating Malcolm's early years and what he was doing before he was incarcerated. And that's my 2 cents.
Thank you. That's good 2 cents. Wait a minute. I'm running my mouth. Yeah, very good 2 cents. Thank you, son. Right now, we're trying to resolve something. I thought we had ourselves set to 9:30. I'm told that we're set to 9. So Todd, are you ready, son? Where's Todd Bridges? Is he ready? Todd Bridges. Todd Burroughs, you ready?
See, that's the programming of television, Zayid. You call me
Yes,
Todd
right.
Bridges,
You
right?
got that right, right?
Different strokes from 40 years ago, right?
Listen, yeah, it's my age, right? But listen, now you up. It looks like you're up on our last few minutes. So bring it strong, because you got a lot. You got a lot to share. I want to thank you, Todd. I want to thank you and Jared for what you did with the live reinvention. Because y'all made it plain. That title was bam, was in the face, right? And it was a live reinvention. And periodically, Malcolm's legacy is going to come under attack by different forces like that. And we have to be prepared to defend his legacy and to protect it with the integrity that it deserves and with the integrity that he so embodies. So I wanted to give you and Jared that shout. I know Jared is on another Zoom conference dedicated to Malcolm today also, right? But I really wanted to really give you all a shout out with that. And the fact that the lie was so deep that Herbert them had to come with another volume. My only issue is that neither one of y'all had me in there. No?
I had so much. I had so much hate to give on Manning Marable. As you see, I'm in both books.
Yes, right. That's right.
But a lot of people don't know that I'm in both books. Well, let me just say this. I mean, there's no way I can equal at all what Herb Boyd and my boss at Seton Hall, Kelly Harris, just said. There's no way I can equal that. So I'll just put on my essayist cap and give you kind of an audio essay for a couple of minutes, and then we'll close out. Thinking about this presentation and thinking about what to say, I thought about a story I heard Alex Haley tell. And, it's Alex Haley, so we don't know whether the story is true or not, right? But we know it's a good story, right? Alex Haley tells this story about he's with Malcolm driving around Harlem, and Malcolm gets very upset and stops the car and runs out. And Alex Haley doesn't know what's going on, so he runs out to see what's going on. And Malcolm X is in front of the Schomburg, and he is yelling at some brothers because they are out playing dice in front of the Schomburg, in front of 135th Street Library. And he admonishes these brothers saying, there are people inside studying about you, learning about you, and you're doing this, right? Zayid, I gotta be honest, in 2020, I think about that and I wonder, who represents the dice throwers today? Is it these Black public intellectuals who are only halfway committed? People who write these kind of popular histories that try to make, Black power part of the Americana and not part of the internationalists. And to be honest, I mean, and it's, and I think Dr. Harris has to educate me a little bit more about this. I also think even us, the so-called Africana wing of Africana studies, are we just throwing dice as well? Because we're not producing the kind of work. I mean, y'all talk a lot. And some of y'all been talking for like 50 years. Y'all talk a lot, but there's not a lot of writing done. And, I think about, when I think about John Henry Clark, I realize I don't love John Henry Clark. Because if I loved John Henry Clark, and I went and studied Freedom Ways, a magazine that none of you have written about, I would have seen that, he and this other guy named Ernest Kaiser, who we don't remember anymore, they wrote over 100 book reviews about Africa. Has anybody on here written 100 book reviews about anything? another thing that I want to say before we close out is, I also realize that as a scholar, and I mean, I just finished 340 pages on Mumia Abu-Jamal, so I am talking a lot of stuff this week, right? Because when you write 340 pages about Mumia Abu-Jamal, you learn a lot about what it is to be a revolutionary. But one of the things I want to say is that I realize that I don't love Malcolm X either. Because if I loved Malcolm X, I would have spent more time writing books that were so powerful that it would cause the next generation of inmates to lose their eyesight trying to read them. We have a lot of work to do, and we don't have a lot of time. We are only 4 years away, because you talk about being 5 years away from the birth of Malcolm X. Yeah. I understand that, but see, I want to talk about what we're 4 years away from. We're 4 years away from that dinner that Charles Johnson had that unofficially started the Harlem Renaissance. How many of us who talk and talk and talk for 50 years and produce one book, if that, right? How many of us are preparing for that? To discuss the Harlem Renaissance in its entirety? How many of us are preparing books on following up Theodore Vincent's Voices of a Black Nation, Political Journalism in the Harlem Renaissance? I think that we have goals, and I think among those goals, and again, it's something I'll talk to Dr. Harris about because maybe your tradition is different. I have 3 degrees in communication, so maybe the Africana tradition is different. But I think we also have to remember that if we love Dr. Clark, we have to remember that Dr. Clark spoke and wrote. And I think it's very important that the brother talked about the archive. We need to establish that archive, but we also need to establish writers who would write in that archive. And so I just want to say that I think that I'm sad that Herb is not here because I wanted to thank him for all the work he has done, because he's really doing the writing level that 3 or 4 of us should be doing. And I think that as we go forward and we remember Malcolm X's legacy, we remember that it was reading a book, the autobiography of Malcolm X, okay, and which started a lot of the revolutionary spirit within many of us. And we have to produce those books because we don't know when YouTube and Facebook and all these things are not going to be available to us. That's all I want to say.
Okay, wow. And that's challenging stuff. Between the generations, are we producing? Are we producing? And I'll take some of that criticism myself as a writer. I'm sitting on, I'm literally going to be working on 2 manuscripts tonight, but I know I'm way behind in terms of my own output on that, and we need to really be self-critical. That's one of Malcolm's strengths too. Malcolm and Fanon, the 2 legends of the class of 1925, both were important on the question of self-criticism, right? So Todd, that's a mouthful. That's a mouthful. I want to just do one quick check and see where we're at, and we got some clarity on how much time we have. Ricardo, do we have? Are we out at 9? Or are we out at 9:30?
I think that we can push it. I know we started off a little later than 7. I cannot verify the end time. It just won't show me that right now. I said we can keep talking, and I'll just look up on her.
If I go off and check it out, I can do that, can I?
I just checked the account. It no longer shows the end time. It just shows the start time.
Because I could have sworn I put in for 9:30. All right. So let's
carry on.
Let's do this. I'd like to hear, for sake of brevity and not wanting for us to get cut off abruptly, I'd like to hear our elder scholars respond to what they've heard in the overview. I'd like to hear from Bill. Is Vi still on the line? She's gone. Okay. But I'd like to hear from Bill, and I'd like to hear from Dr. J as closing remarks.
She's still on.
Vi still on?
Yeah, her thing is muted.
Okay. I'd like to hear from y'all. There's one simple question that I want y'all to try and answer based on everything we're trying to synthesize tonight. Where do we go from here? Right? Where do we go from here? Some powerful suggestions, practical suggestions were laid out by some of us, right? So how are we going to, what next steps should we be taking to make those steps happen, right? And we've got to come out of these silos that we're in, and we got to really start looking at this united front. That's my editorializing. But I'd like to hear from Dr. J and Bill and Vi as our presiding elders, how they're synthesizing tonight. Vi, can she hear us?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Vi, you go first.
Okay. Well, this is what I heard from the brother Burroughs, was that there has to be a body of information that should be passed on as a continuum of all of the information. I come from that we have to have a way to get it to the masses of people. I'm saying that one of the things that I think we can all agree on is the fight for our health care. That if every one of us in everything that we do push the masses of our people to demand a single payer health care, it will happen. It will happen. The health of our people, in terms of what I see, is number one. Number one. The reason that the COVID-19 was so devastating was the disparity in healthcare. And even those of you who could afford healthcare could not afford the amount of money it costs to prevent your community from being so attacked. Every one of you, I know every one of you pay in healthcare. I think it's a very simple prospect for us to unite around. And that is the demand for single payer healthcare. There's no two sides. The enemy is clear. That's big pharma. That is the health insurance, the almost $1 trillion health insurance industry. It's clear. All of you with your reputations, with your ability to write and discuss and interact, we can make it happen. Single payer health care. That's my contribution.
Right on. I appreciate that on a lot of fronts. One, because it puts the Black radical tradition back in the front of pushing the whole, where does the whole country go from here, back in the forefront. If America's going to find its way to socialism, it's going to be the field slaves, the descendants of field slaves kicking those doors in to make that happen. And that might be the first door to kick in. And I'm saying that as a COVID-19 survivor. Right on. Okay. Dr. J, is Dr. J still at y'all's?
Yes.
Let's get Dr. J's input, and then we'll let Bill close out.
Well, certainly, it's been a great pleasure for me to be a part of this historic activity and to use my 84-year perspective. My birthday, January 19th, will be my 84th. So I want to congratulate all of you who are able to pull this enormous process together. It's not a once-in-a-lifetime activity. It's something that we need to take lessons from and make it a regular activity.
Yes, sir.
To bring out our truth to our people, because we can't expect them to struggle if they do not know the truth.
That's right.
And we know that Frederick Douglass, among others, who fought his way out of slavery, said, if there is no struggle, there is no progress. Those who profess to favor freedom yet deprecate agitation are men and women, we can say, who want the crops without plowing out the ground. They want the rain without the thunder and lightning. They want the ocean without the awful roar of its many waters. The struggle can be a moral one, it can be a political one, but it must be a struggle. Why? Because power concedes nothing without a demand. It never did. Find out what any people will quietly submit to, and you have found out the exact measure of injustice and wrong which will be imposed upon them, and these will continue until they are resisted with either word or blows or both. But we need to go beyond the words and the blows. We need to organize. We need to Africanize our minds and organize. Dr. Clark, I have a book right here. He was not just a scholar and a journalistic genius. He was an organizer. We never give him credit for the movements that he organized and institutions that he sustained. So he was not only telling us to make sure you get into do the academic thing, but you got to do the people's thing. And so this book that he left us with notes Africans at the crossroads, and certainly we are at the crossroads. And this is Notes for an African World Revolution. And certainly all of us have some understanding that revolution is necessary at this time and has been for some time. And so we have to organize all the elements of our community. And Vi is correct. Usually Vi comes up with some heavy revolutionary words, but she's saying we got to be practical, take an issue and make it work. Health is the most important thing that we have. We are seeing that now, that all of us have a question mark over the health question. Health is the most important thing, but it's not just physical health, it's the mental health. And that's where Malcolm stood so strong. He stood so strong. So I'm so proud that all of you, especially this is Jersey speaking now. We're talking to Brooklyn, we're talking to Queens, we're talking to the Bronx, we're talking to Harlem. Jersey got a big voice in terms of this presentation now, simply because we're the same community. Barriers across city limits, rivers that block us. That's not, we're about African peoples coming together. And so this is a spirit that is real. And when you see this, what Dr. Clark has done, he's talking about the unfinished revolution of Patrice Lumumba, unfinished revolution of Nkrumah, the unfinished revolution of Garvey, the unfinished revolution in Kenya of Tom Mboya. But his life was the unfinished revolution of Malcolm X and the work that he was able to help Malcolm do. And I just want to give thanks to him working not only with us men and young men, but working with the women. He knew how to work with the women. Betty Shabazz, burdened with the children and the responsibility of the negativity about Malcolm's legacy, she was able to stand because there were women that stood with her family. There were men that stood with her. There were elders like Dr. Clark that stood with her. I helped to stay with her because this image of Malcolm, which I have here, which is so important, this is the New York Post back in the 60s and 64, talking about Malcolm. And what they say is, Malcolm says, more and worse riots will erupt. Why? Because of the pressure that's been put on our people. And then Malcolm was able to let somebody called Alex Haley work with him. And Alex was able to do what he could do, but he had limitations, but he still attempted to put that story of Malcolm's life together in the autobiography. And then he went to work on Roots. And it was the work on Roots that was supposed to also help provide monies for the babies, for Betty, Queen Mother Betty, doing all that she could with all the help that she got. And persons like Professor Small knew the inside story better than most. And Betty was a miracle woman. And what she did, carrying this enormous legacy and raising the children and then dealing with attacks. And Alex had a commitment to help, but he just did not sign the contracts to give him the type of money he needed. It was an embarrassment when Betty would say to me, your friend ain't doing what he's supposed to do, speak to him. So we attempted to try to get him to help the family as best he could, but he signed contracts. So if you're going to do something important and significant, make sure you know what you're signing and what you're doing. So I'm very happy. I'm elated. Brother Smalls asked me to stand in for him. Nobody can stand in for him. Spirit moves him. Struggle and sacrifice moves him like I've never seen anybody else that outside of my personal brother Jeff and the others who have been in the struggle, Amiri Baraka and others who I've been a part of their life and they've been a part of mine. So we're on a victorious path, family. Move it down the road, the victory road. And only you can do what you have to do. And we can take this knowledge and make it work for us. But if struggle and people are not prepared to give their life, we can't do it. Ilyasah looks so beautiful. I don't know what she's been eating and what she's been doing, but it's not her beauty. It's that inner strength that she has. Can you imagine being in the middle child of all of those children? And so she has, let's give her kudos. She's carrying a part of Malcolm and Betty. That is a magnificent example of the one. We don't have to worry about the beauty. It comes with the struggle. We don't have to worry about how you are looking. You have to be healthy if you're going to be in struggle and revolution. So brothers and sisters, this has been one of the great moments for me. And I've had many. One of them was May 1964 in Ghana when I was there with Malcolm. But I could not do what people were doing, including all of them that were there around him, and Maya Angelou and the rest. I couldn't greet him because I was with the Operation Crossroads Africa program. I was in charge of 12 nations from Senegal all the way to the Congo. And Ghana was my base, and we had a death on the project. And so instead of me going to shake Malcolm's hand, I had to go into Kolibu, into the morgue and try to find a spot to put the body of this young man who died. But just to be in Ghana at the time that Malcolm was there is one of my great, great, great moments. And we have to thank our sister in St. Louis who did the photo of Malcolm in which he's holding his ring up to
Alice Wyndham,
hand up to his head, and he's got that African dashiki on. And she captured that. And I have to get, Alice Wyndham was there.
Right. She's still in the land of the living. We got to get to her too. That's right.
Her kudos. So brothers and sisters, it's about the family. It's about the family on a victorious path. And we cannot stop. Don't stop. Keep on moving.
Beautiful, beautiful. Thank you, sir. Right. We got to get it. She has been on my mind. In fact, I used her picture for one of my posts today. And we really need to reach out to Sister Alice. Thank you so much. Where's Bill at? Is he?
I'm right here. Can you hear me?
Bill, give us.
Yeah. Well, I think first to answer the question we asked tonight, is Malcolm still relevant in the 21st century? Yes. The second thing, because he's still relevant to our struggle for liberation in the 21st century, we have to be on the lookout for those who will try to distort his legacy, because it can't be destroyed. It's too strong. And as Du Bois said in Black Reconstruction in America, they first try to destroy your legacy. And then if they can't destroy it, they try to ignore it. And if they can't ignore it, then they try to distort it, right? Our enemies can neither ignore, right, or destroy the legacy of Malcolm X, but they still have the capability of destroying it. What does that mean for us? That means you can bet your bottom dollar that when it comes to 2025, there'll be some major attempt to have a big intellectual gathering and conference full of public intellectuals who just try to distort the message that Malcolm put out, right? And therefore, it's incumbent upon us, those few of us old heads who may be around then, but certainly the generation behind us, right, to have a major effort, in anticipation of all those who will try to do damage. So we will have the legitimate international gathering on Malcolm. But to do that, several things have to be put in place. One, those important younger independent scholars who are working on Malcolm have to come together, right? So we have an intellectual impetus that will reach its fruition about the time of that conference. Secondly, we have to have a number of smaller conferences and meetings and what have you that build to the major one. Third, we have to have an international outreach. We have to find all those scholars around the world who are talking about Malcolm and tell them they need to meet us in 2025, wherever we happen to determine we're going to do this thing. And then we have to think very specifically about how our people who we wouldn't necessarily call intellectuals in that sense, how they get information, how they communicate. Do we need some comic books, you know, what they call them now, graphic novels, you know,
Todd Burroughs.
you know, that involve, you know, the very important things we want to tell people about Malcolm. Do we need updated study guides?
Mm-hmm.
Right, because there are many study guides that came out of last year, the updated study guides. And of course, besides these kind of intellectual activist activities, we need funds, right? When you talk about the scale that's necessary, right? Somebody's got to commit a campus, you know, with major auditoriums. They have to give us secretarial, you know, space, computer facilities, right? Money to help bring people there. That, of course, is a danger because whenever you're looking for major funds, there are all kind of people around that give you all kind of money, Ford Foundation or what have you, but they'll co-opt your effort. So we have to develop a mechanism that provides significant, sufficient, independent funding for this major activity, right? Because what happens in 2025 will probably define, right, our perception of Malcolm, his utility in our movement going forward for the next 75 years of this century.
Wow, excellent, excellent, excellent. Good, visionary.
Zayid, can you hear me?
Yes,
Zayid,
ma'am.
can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
I have to say for me that Malcolm was the mover of people. People. I'm always, we've gotta move people. We've got to move people. That our information has to be such, it has to get to the people and move people. The masses make revolution. The masses make revolution. Malcolm made us with his oratory, yes, but his organizing, his mobilizing, his direction. The masses make revolution, my comrades. We've got to make them conscious.
You know, right on, Vi. In fact, one of the things that's missing from this conversation, and I'll take some self-criticism for that, I'll make the self-criticism, is that one of the things that moves young people, right, is something that my generation gave, you know, just as I was coming of age. That's this thing called hip hop. And we've got to figure out a way to use hip hop to give it some legs that it once had. It did have a golden age. Comes to sampling, Malcolm is the most sampled, hands down, out of all of our freedom fighters. We have to figure out a way how to reach out to our kids who are steeped in that mode of expression with some consciousness, in an African way, with our best values and our best examples, and not be apologetic about that and dare them to own up to what they can be. Right on to that. So right on to that. Let's right on to that. So we're gonna wrap up, y'all. It's been a good session. I'm very proud of what we've done. Yes, sir.
I just want to chime in here, right? Because
we're almost out of time.
Well, what I'm saying to you is that we have to be very clear and conscious that there was an attack on hip hop. Excuse me, let me turn on my speaker. Maybe that'll help. We have to be very, can you hear me?
Yes.
We have to be very clear that there was an attack on hip hop. The hip hop that I used to listen to at my grandfather's house in Harlem, that where you could only get it on that one Harlem channel, WHBI, was attacked by the corporate structure and the government because they understood the powerful medium that it was. And that hip hop was coming out of Baba Sales and Baba Doc's generation, the Abby Dobsons, the Last Poets, the Mary Barakas. That music influenced the hip hop that I know of as a young man coming when it was coming into the world into the 70s. But there was a clear attack on that. We have to be present that whatever we do, that the enemy is always attacking us because he does not want us too black, too strong. He wants us to be used and abused at his whim. Like Zach says, we have to be clear. When we act on offense, we also have to be clear. When we acting on defense or reactionary, we have to make sure that whatever we do is clear and straightforward to the point. And these people are not our friends. We have to re-Africanize our minds and everything that we do in our lives. And until we do that, we will never succeed. We can't get it by voting it into it. Malcolm said that freedom ain't free. You can't legislate freedom. So we have to be clear in our actions and stop dilly-dallying. These children are looking at us and they're not paying us any mind because we are dilly-dallying and pussyfooting around. And they say, oh, they're not serious. We have to make it clear. The children know when we are clear and what our intentions are. And when we out for money and ego and all this other things, we have to make sure that these children understand where our heart is, and our heart is for these children. When we say, I am Malcolm X, we have to mean that. Malcolm gave his life. Malcolm shed his blood. Malcolm left his wife and his children behind so that we could get something from his struggle. So let us remember that. Every Malcolm X day, but every damn day. Every day that we move, let's move.
You have no objections here, Charles, but let's be clear also that, you know, hip hop is not the only thing that's come under. Hip hop's attack, the attack on hip hop is a microcosm of the attacks that our struggle have always faced. And all of our people have to be prepared to deal with that. So your point is well taken. All right, everybody, we're going to wrap up. It's been a beautiful session. And you had the youngest voice come with the fire at the end. That's telling. We'll take that, right? The African proverb says, do not put out fire, right? So let's deal with that, okay? Thank you very much. Awesome night. Dr. Sales, Dr. J, always great to see you. You know, we're going to bring our fire from Newark, New Jersey. You know we're going to do that, right? Brother, I owe you a phone call. It's been years. I miss us being in the trenches together, standing up to knuckleheads that look like us and knuckleheads that look like us. Right? Todd, Kelly, I'm very proud of both of you young men. I'm very proud of y'all, right? And we need more young men and women, you know, to come forward. Y'all need to help us identify those young voices that we have not heard that need to be heard and to help us bring them forward, all right? So we say X's and Malcolm is the answer. We're contemplating some other series like this while we're still in this virtual reality. Definitely going to try and pull something together on Malcolm and police brutality, because I'm going to get I've turned that up on wherever I go up and down the highways and byways of this racist country, and I got plenty to do yet. And of course, this May 19th has been a huge healing, right? I feel pretty good. I feel like getting at it again. Although I've been told to wait at least another couple of weeks before I go buck wild on this cracker again. So, you know, we love you, all right? We love everybody's participation. Great to have Ilyasah back in the mix with us, right? And we got to build that united front. Let us not get away from that. We got to build that united front on the 225, right? Straight ahead. We'll see you in the whirlwind.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right now.